We're going to, hello, everybody. We're going to start the meeting today. It is Wednesday, November 8th, 2017. We're here for the Education, Environment, and Sustainability Committee meeting. Can we have roll call, please?
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon?
Here.
Ms. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Schrein? Mr. Schrein is absent at the moment. Mr. Brady?
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have any public comment related to our agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay.
First is Mr. Matt, is it Coons? Sorry, come to the podium.
Name, please, and just city you live in, perhaps.
Okay. Good afternoon, then. My name is Matt Coons. I live in Lakewood. I have been asked by the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus to comment on behalf of our organization about the proposed carryout bag fee for environmental remediation. In brief, we support this proposal. The case for reducing the use of carryout bags is compelling. Our county alone, I understand, goes through hundreds of millions of plastic bags each year. Discarded bags pollute our Great Lakes, as well as our own neighborhoods where they clog the storm drains. The iconic brown paper bag is also problematic. Paper bag manufacturing is even more polluting than plastic bag manufacturing. It is, again, I understand, many times more polluting in the form of carbon emissions, which are driving our climate away from stable futures. Senator Bernie Sanders has said, "I believe that decades from now, our kids and grandchildren will scratch their heads and they will say, 'Why did you leave the planet less habitable than it could have been?'" That question applies directly to our society's choices to promote or discourage carry-out bag waste. This is absolutely a choice that we make. When my friends have discussed this proposal recently, more than once I have heard someone say, "We functioned before plastic bags. We even functioned before paper bags. We do have alternatives." The Progressive Caucus believes that we should embrace these alternatives and that doing so is very much a progressive policy. Today's pollution effectively is a tax imposed on future generations without their consent. The proposal before us today offers a positive and progressive reform to bring more equity to this issue. Reduced pollution will benefit vulnerable populations who usually bear the heaviest cost of pollution today. It will benefit tomorrow's voiceless generations who deserve the best world that we can preserve on their behalf, both by reducing new pollution and funding environmental remediation measures. Commendably, this proposal also includes measures to reduce the bag fee's potential burden on low-income populations and to assist them in obtaining reusable bags. I regard this, in aggregate, as a thoughtful, progressive policy suggestion. Therefore, on behalf of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus, I would like to encourage your efforts to address this issue and thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Next is Chanel Smith.
Good afternoon, Council. It's really good to be here back before this body. I can tell you that I've missed all of your faces, and I missed being in this building, so thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of this legislation. I don't have any directly prepared remarks, but I do want to tell you about my thinking around this particular legislation. And I think a lot of the conversation, of course, is about the plastic bags and the fee, but I think the real thing that we're talking about is the protection of Lake Erie. Lake Erie, our greatest water resource. We can see what's happening around the country when it comes to climate change. You know, they're dealing with droughts in California. We have water issues happening, but we have this great asset here in Cuyahoga County, and it's Lake Erie. And during my tenure here as the Deputy Director of Sustainability for the county, there was often different ideas percolating about how this body and how the county could play a role in protecting Lake Erie. And many times the jurisdiction of the county, I'm pretty sure Law can speak to this better than I can, there's not many things that we necessarily do or can do as a county. You know, we don't control zoning laws. And even though we have a public works department that manages sewer manages sewers for our municipalities, we don't control the laws that happen in those cities that can really impact and protect our Great Lakes. So I see this as an amazing opportunity for you as county council members to really leave a legacy on protecting the future of our lake. And it's a very progressive policy. Actually, I just got back from Washington, D.C. last night, and I went to the store with my friend, and it's natural for him to, before he leaves the house, for him to grab his reusable bag. He doesn't even think about the fee that they have there, and that's just a way of life in a lot of places across the country, and I know you guys have talked about that before. As far as the legislation, I think it covers essential issues that, some of the concerns that I know people have. It protects low-income shoppers and households. So people who already receive public assistance, they won't have to pay this 10-cent fee. And the other thing that I think is really important is the protection of small businesses and mom and pop shop stores. Those businesses that are 7,000 square feet or smaller, they are sort of exempt from this legislation. Another thing I think is really great, and I applaud Councilwoman Simon for working with the big grocery stores to get them on board of this legislation. I'm pretty sure that was not an easy feat to handle, but for them to be on board and supporting this, I think that's really a good sign for actually business innovation in our community. And so I just want to leave you with the words that I started with. This is, in my humble opinion, a great way for you guys to really say this county council that you played a role in protecting Lake Erie, and you were the leaders in the state of Ohio doing this. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate being here before you today.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Clarification, some grocers are on board. We have one with us, and some are not on board, but we're here today to hear from one that is.
Mr. John Segura.
Yes. Good afternoon, Council. My name is John Zagara. I own and operate Zagara's Marketplace in Cleveland Heights. For 20 years, I have been frustrated trying to implement a recycle, reuse program within our four walls. It is embraced by some 20 years ago, very few, and not very much by the rest of the folks that I was taking care of as customers. And this legislation puts a whole different light on the recycle, reuse principle. Pay the 10 cents or bring your own bag. If they bring their own bag, they're saving the 10 cents. It's county-wide, so we don't have an issue where one grocer has an advantage over another grocer who might be on a border, or me trying to do it just within my four walls. So I appreciate these efforts and I support the remediation. The amount of bags that I buy per year that we go through just in our one store is tremendous. It's $40,000 a year for 2-cent plastic bags. I also use a paper bag in combination because I have a lot of walkers and they need a more strengthened bag to walk back and forth to their apartment. So I commend the efforts and support the efforts. And if there's any questions, is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I
Thank
think
you
we
for
can,
having
if
me.
you want to, maybe wait till after if you have any questions, and if you can.
Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks a lot. Okay.
No one else has signed in. And also I'd like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is in attendance.
And Councilman Schron, I'm not sure if you caught, I didn't hear. We have minutes from November 1st. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, minutes approved. Okay, so can we read the legislation? And we're going to go forward with a Skype discussion. Okay, thank you.
Ordinance number 2017-0006, enacting Chapter 721 of the Cuyahoga County Code to authorize a carry-out bag fee for environmental remediation.
Thank you. So, Madam Clerk, are we going live on Skype with Delegate Carr?
Yes, Delegate Carr, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon.
Are we going to be able to see him? Hello. Hi, Delegate Carr. I would like to just give a background and of you and your bio for a minute. Delegate Carr was born in Ohio and graduated from Cleveland Heights High, which is in our county. Al and his wife have 3 sons and live in Kensington, Maryland. Al represented residents in Lower Montgomery County in 2002 as an elected council member and later mayor pro tem for the town of Kensington. He joined the Maryland House of Delegates in 2007. I asked Al Carr to speak with us today because he is extremely knowledgeable about the inner workings and how the model in Montgomery County and Washington, D.C. is working, that this legislation is mirrored after. Al will be able to speak about how it's actually been implemented and how it's going, and be able to field questions from council members who might have some questions about how it actually works. And Al has the knowledge and information that will be able to provide that. So I'm wondering, Delegate Carr, if you'll be able to talk a little bit about the model in Montgomery County, and the size of Montgomery County is similar to ours, if you would like to proceed and just give us a little background.
Okay, sure. First of all, good afternoon, and thanks for having me. Really glad to talk with you about this. So what I'm going to do is just give a brief overview of the plastic bag fee program that's in existence here in the District of Columbia and in Montgomery County, Maryland. And I'm a state legislator in Maryland. I represent a piece of Montgomery County. And politically, they're 2 different jurisdictions, but they really are connected because they share a border, and they people who live in Montgomery County work in Washington, D.C., and vice versa. They're the same watershed. So it really is a region. And about 8 years ago, the District of Columbia did pass into law their bag fee program. So that was in January of 2010 that took effect. And then 2 years later, Montgomery County, Maryland passed their bag fee program. That went into effect in January of 2012. So Montgomery County has a population of 1.044 million people. District of Columbia is about 681,000 people. So the way that the programs work are it's a 5-cent fee, and if you bring your own bag, a reusable bag, you don't pay the fee. If you accept a disposable bag, paper or plastic, from the retailer, then you pay the 5-cent fee per bag. The program works. It's effective in cleaning up the watershed. It's accepted by residents and business owners, and the money is being used towards cleanup. So, for example, in the District of Columbia, there was a 2013 survey. This was 3 years after the law had been in effect, of residents and businesses, and it indicated that bag use is down approximately 60% citywide, and the vast majority of residents and business owners were either neutral or positive about the law. And then the stream cleanup data in both D.C. and Montgomery County in 2012 showed a 72% reduction in bags that were found in streams since before the laws took effect, and that is not a difference that was seen in the other jurisdictions that did not adopt such a law. And then in Montgomery County, of course, there's been similar results in terms of the reduction, and then the observations of what actual shoppers do when they're in stores is pretty dramatic in Montgomery County versus the other jurisdictions in the region that didn't adopt a plastic bag and a paper bag program. And again, in Montgomery County, the money that's collected does go back towards cleanup and water quality, so it is really tied back into the purpose of cleaning up the the waterways, rivers, and streams, which are obviously impaired by plastic bags and that type of litter.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Delegate Carr, are you ready for questions?
Yes.
Any from the committee?
Yes, please.
Councilman Brown, then Sharon.
Thank you, Councilwoman Simon. I was just curious, how much revenue does this generate to help clean up do the cleanup in the community?
So in the District of Columbia, the program generates between $1.8 and $2 million a year. And that money is used to pay for trash traps and other restoration efforts on the Anacostia River, litter prevention, education, environmental education programs, and rebate incentive programs for residents who install stormwater practices on their property, as well as enforcement, outreach, and education about the law. And then in Montgomery County, the program generates about $2.6 million annually.
So it seems to me by the math, I can't calculate, but it seems like there's still a lot of bags being distributed throughout the counties or the jurisdictions that are served at that rate. Can you tell us the reduction you've seen in distribution since introducing the fee?
Sure. So in the District of the stream cleanup data, this is from groups that go out and clean the trash from the streams in DC and Montgomery. They showed a 72% reduction in the bags found in the streams since before the laws took effect.
And with the fee, the 5-cent fee that you have, how much of that goes back to the retailer?
So in the District of Columbia, either 1 or 2 cents goes back to the retailer, depending on whether that retailer has a credit program. And then in Montgomery County, Maryland, 1 cent of the 5 cents goes back to the retailer.
And I also think I heard you testify that there is an opportunity to use a recyclable bag or to use your own bag. When you say your own bag, is that permitting people that have maybe paid for a bag previously to reuse an old plastic bag?
Yes. So these two laws have created a culture change. So people have gotten into the habit of obtaining some durable, reusable bags that they'll maybe keep a few in their car and bring with them when they go shopping. And when you bring your own bag and you're not accepting one from the retailer, then you don't pay any fee.
Okay, gotcha. I think those are my questions. Thank you so much for presenting today in your testimony. If I have more, I'll respectfully request them through the chairwoman. Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you, Councilwoman Brown. We have Councilman Jack Schron is
Thank you.
next. Mr. Carr.
Thank you. The Lowe's and Home Depot and places like that, so much of that charging now is being done through self-checkout. Did they have to collect the same fee as the grocery stores?
That's a good question. I know that the grocery stores, they do have self-checkouts as well, and they were able to just program that into the self-checkout process so that it asks you as you're checking out, how many bags did you take, and it'll charge you accordingly. As far as Home Depot and the home improvement retailers, I'd have to double check whether those type of retailers fall under the law in Montgomery County and DC. I don't remember.
This is your legislation?
No, it is
Oh,
not.
okay, all right. So you're You're just talking on behalf of the legislation. So you don't know whether it was done in facilities, other facilities that are using plastic bags. I'm sure you've shopped at Home Depot or Lowe's at some point.
I do shop at Home Depot and Lowe's.
Do you bring your own bags when you go in there to buy your nuts and tools and screwdrivers and things like that?
When I go into Home Depot, I usually don't take a, if I don't need a bag, I usually don't take a bag. If I'm just buying a couple of small items or things I can carry, I don't take a bag. If I remember to bring my bag, great. If it's something that I need a bag for, I don't mind paying 5 cents to take a plastic bag from the retailer.
Okay, so I guess you are asking them to change their business practice because you're asking them to reprogram computers that are part of their system. So is that built into your cost on that? Is that what that 1 cent is for them to redo their entire computer system? So when they're doing people's self-checkout, is that part of the process?
Well, I mean, the bags aren't really free. As Mr. Zagara pointed out, there are significant overhead costs for businesses. The plastic bags cost about 2 cents each, and the paper bags are closer to 5 cents each. So, when the survey was done in the District of Columbia in 2013, it was found that, the retailers were either supportive of the law or neutral. It did not create burdens for them. It actually was relieving them of some of their overhead to not have to purchase these bags that they are providing to consumers.
So you're expecting Mr. Zakar is going to reduce his cost by the $40,000 you just got done testifying, and I assume that a larger grocery store is going to reduce their cost to their customer by the millions of dollars that are of bags, and it's going to get passed along. Is that what you're suggesting will happen here?
Yeah, what I'm saying is to the extent that retailers do not have to purchase those bags because the shoppers are bringing their own bags, yes, that is overhead that they do not have to pay for.
I assume it's going to go right in their profit, though, be honest. Let's be honest about this, okay?
Mr. Carr's not here to talk about profit. So if you have questions on legislation,
Yeah, I'm
that's
talking about
significant,
the
Mr.
way the
Sharon.
operation, he was here
Yeah,
brought in as an
but
expert on.
let's keep it on
legislation.
topic if we can. It's not about whether retail is profit. They might have a profit.
He
That's,
brought up Mr. Zakaric. I did not.
Okay,
And
please
he
proceed,
brought him
Mr.
up
Schron.
as being an example of the $40,000 that he was going to experience as a savings. I didn't bring it up, the witness did, so,
the witness.
well, that's what he usually, isn't he witnessing?
John Zagara is a very
no,
well-known.
the gentleman on the
Mr.
speaker.
Zagara is the one who testified. Did you miss it?
Did you miss, he brought it up on the
Just
live?
were you here for when John
I
Zagara
was here,
testified?
yes.
Okay, that's all
Yeah,
my question
I was here,
is.
and it was brought up by the speaker on that.
Go on.
Okay, let's go into some more of this. We've been brought up a number of times that this is just the start. This will be a good start. So let me ask you, because you're supporting this kind of legislation, last week in Echo Magazine, they identified 11 disposable items, none of which included plastic bags, by the way. They had soda straws, they had Keurig cups, they had cups from when you buy your coffee at Starbucks or any of the cups that are all non-returnable. And of course, we get the plastic bottles and the plastic cups that we actually even have up in our counter. How many of those are you planning or do you anticipate will be taxed under this same kind of legislation in the future, if this is the start?
Yeah, so, I mean, I can speak to the experience here in Montgomery County and Washington, D.C. So the bag program started 8 years ago in Washington, D.C., about 6 years ago in Montgomery County, Maryland. It has not led to subsequent legislation on those other items. There has been, just like you have, plenty of discussion about ways to reduce trash and litter and waste. But in our region, it did not result in those other items being treated in the same way as disposable bags.
Okay, well, my only comment was that 11 items were listed last week in one of the very well-respected eco magazines, and it did not indicate the plastic bags was even in the top 11 items. So it looks like we're finding a solution because it's an easy one to go after. We had also an expert testify 4 meetings ago, and she could not identify the plastic bag content actually being in the water when she was asked specifically about that. It was an assumption that took place. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Just for clarification, Dr. Sherry Mason testified that the nanoparticles you were questioning contain the same elements that are found in the 319 million bags that are disposed of in Cuyahoga County every year. Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Thank you. Representative Carr, thank you for your presentation. I am a councilman here in Cuyahoga County that represents one of the poorest areas within our county. So as I consider my vote on this legislation, I'll share with you, I was raised in Baltimore, Maryland. So I'm familiar with your area. Montgomery County is one of the more affluent counties in the Maryland area. Can you speak to the any pushback that you may have gotten to this legislation from some of the poor areas in certainly Washington, D.C.? Can you speak to what type of concerns, if any, were expressed by, again, some of the poor areas in your district areas?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Councilmember Jones. That's a really good question. So those concerns did come up in Washington, D.C. and in Montgomery County, Maryland, when they were considering their different pieces of legislation. But I can say that a couple of points. One is, there's sometimes an assumption that people in lower income neighborhoods, don't care about getting rid of litter. And, we know that's not true. Everyone wants to live in a clean neighborhood, and some of those people are bearing the brunt of the litter and the trash. And I know, there was opposition from from industry that did attempt to stir up, opposition from different groups to make it, appear as if low-income people were opposed to the bill. But I can say, after having it been in place for 8 years in the District of Columbia, which does have quite a range of incomes, and it was supported by all of their council members, in all of the wards there, both relatively affluent and people of more modest means. And after 8 years of being in place there and 6 years in Montgomery County, Maryland, which Montgomery County, by the way, is maybe not as wealthy as people used to think of it in the past. There have not been any negative impacts on low-income people, or in terms of convenience or cost, or things that might hinder them.
Representative Carr, when the legislation passed, maybe not so much before, and I understand when you say there was organized opposition, but as the residents began to realize after the passage of the legislation in those early years that they were paying the 5 cents, was there much concern at that point?
Yeah, I mean, those concerns were voiced when the legislation was being heard and deliberated upon, but in practice, once the law was implemented, those types of problems I'm not aware that those problems actually happened. I know there were efforts to make the reusable bags available to people, and people learned very quickly how to avoid the fee. So, you know, problems like that did not materialize.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I think Councilman Miller had a question.
Delegate Carr, thank you very much for sharing with us this afternoon. And my question is both in D.C. and Montgomery County. Can you describe how long the legislative process took for the legislation to be enacted, and to what extent was it contentious, and did industry get actively involved and oppose it, or did you not see much of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to refresh my memory and get back to you to tell you how long exactly the legislation took place. I know D.C., the brainchild of that legislation was a guy named Tommy Wells, who was a council member at the time, and he's now the director of the D.C. Department of Energy and Environment. I don't believe it took an inordinately long amount of time to enact the legislation. There was quite a lot of discussion. There was some opposition voiced by industry, and being the first jurisdiction in the region, when other jurisdictions followed on, like Montgomery County, it went a lot more quickly because it had been in place in the neighboring jurisdiction without problems.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Brown.
Thank you, Councilwoman Simon. So the question that I wanted to ask Representative is if there was any consideration given to phasing out the bags.
So is your question that whether a bag ban was considered as opposed to a fee?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, there have been discussions about bag bans versus fees, and you know, I believe in this case that there was the D.C. Council and the Montgomery County Council ultimately chose not to go that route. They wanted to still have the bags be available and give consumers the choice, but really just provide an incentive to encourage a more sustainable practice. And there have been a few jurisdictions that have done an outright ban of the plastic bags. For example, in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is a municipality within Cuyahoga County, they did go ahead with an outright ban of plastic bags. And I think Chestertown, Maryland, which is not in Montgomery County. So some jurisdictions have gone that route, but the fee was the route that was chosen by Montgomery and DC, and has been working well.
Is there a, I guess, and this is probably just more for discussion for the committee as a whole, is I understand it looks like a survey was done too with the water, and I'm not sure if this is a question. I think it's more of a question for our committee. Have we done such a survey, and is there any consideration of doing a survey as it relates to the plastic bags?
The survey was completed by Dr. Sherry Mason over a course of 2 years. And we have the results of the study showing the concentration of plastic pollution in the lake.
And I guess part of my my concern is it sounds like we want to reduce the impact that plastic bags are having on our community, and the fee would be a way of doing that. But at the risk of upsetting some others, I would like to explore the idea of possibly phasing out bags over the course of maybe a period of time if the bags are causing as much, hindrance and fractions on, and health issues that we're saying, then maybe we should not use them at all. So I just added that.
Thank you. I appreciate that because people have asked that of me about why not just ban outright the plastic. And I think we had testimony at the beginning of our meeting about the environmental implication of paper, because if you ban plastic, and I'm going to have the delegates speak to this, if there's an elimination of plastic bags, then the paper goes up exponentially. And that's going to cost the retail and our grocers double. I heard from John Zagara, the cost of paper is at least double of that of plastic. So the implication is we're going to trade one environmental harm for another. And secondly, it's going to impact retail in an adverse way. And part of the legislation, obviously, is to have stakeholders not only be able to be neutral with this, but to benefit and thrive in our communities. I mean, this legislation is here to protect retail and our local businesses. So that's why, from my perspective, just eliminating one and replacing the other creates an impact financially to business, as well as having a hardship to the environment, which long-term with climate change, we don't need to keep stressing the delicate balance we're in right now. But I would like the delegate to respond to that, and I appreciate the question.
Sure, yeah, so when we've had these discussions about a ban versus just a fee on paper and plastic, we did come out with a similar conclusion, is that we don't want to have a system where we're just pushing people onto paper bags, because the paper bags are more costly than the plastic bags. They're, if I remember correctly, about 5 cents per bag for paper versus 2 cents per bag for plastic. So you would be increasing the costs on retailers and also ultimately on consumers, which is one problem. And the other is the environmental problem, is that the paper bags are not necessarily good for the environment because of it takes a tremendous amount of energy and chemicals and water to manufacture the paper bags, and so that may not be a net gain for the environment if people were to just simply shift from plastic to paper.
Am I? Okay, I definitely appreciate that. I guess that, and again, I'm still learning a lot about this issue, and it just seems to me that if we eliminate one, that at least we've taken a step towards correcting the environmental problems. If we eliminated the plastic bags completely, and to compensate for that fee, maybe if we're trying to condition and change our habits, we put that 10-cent fee on the paper bags instead. And perhaps I don't, and forgive me again, maybe I don't fully understand the legislation. The 10-cent fee would go for plastic and paper? Are we plastic and paper? Okay, all right. And as far as retailers would go, so like your Nordstroms, who give you the nice paper bags, we would pay an additional 10-cent fee on those? Yes, okay, all right.
So in California, just as a note, most models, California banned plastic, but they have a 10-cent fee statewide on paper. So that's a model. And it's working. And the grocers there stood up to keep that in effect statewide.
I have a question.
I just want, Councilman Conwell, are you leaving? Can you text me? I did. Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry, everybody.
You were talking.
Okay, Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Carr, you expressed your fee is 5 cents on the bag. We are considering 10 cents. Did you ever have any discussions on the dollar amount, and how did you arrive at 5 cents?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Council Member. That's a great question. So the thinking behind the 5 cents was that, the goal was not really to raise revenue. We're not trying to get into people's wallets. We're trying to get into their minds. to change the habits and encourage a more sustainable use of the reusable bags. So that was the original thought process. I know some jurisdictions, as Sonny mentioned, California have higher fees, but that was the thought behind why the 5 cents in D.C. And Maryland. And that's been a pretty effective amount in terms of, being enough to make people want to avoid the fee and to get them to change the habit. But a 10-cent fee is not uncommon, and that's used in a lot of other jurisdictions.
In Columbia, you said that the portion of the 5 cents is 1 cent or 2 cents. Or did you mean? Could you clarify that for me?
Sure. So in the District of Columbia, there are certain retailers, for example, Target, where the retailer will give the shopper a credit on their own for bringing a reusable bag. So retailers like that were being given 2 cents, and retailers that did not have a credit like that would be getting 1 cent back. In Montgomery County, it was just, I think, they were shooting for just a simpler bill, so they just went with a blanket 1 cent, regardless of the type of retailer.
I like that expression you said, get into their minds and not in their wallets. Was there any effort to educate at the point of sale, right there at the cashier, where any type of signage or anything that just further educated the customer about using the reusable bags? I have to admit, I have not always been one who recycles. My wife does. I can't say that I've been very good at times. But as a result of this legislation, I have noticed as I've gone into the market, I've seen the reusable bags. I've seen them available for purchase. But have you made any efforts or to again at that point of sale to use signage or anything to again further educate the consumer?
Yes, a great question. Yeah, both in D.C. and in Montgomery County, there was extensive outreach at the point of sale to educate the retailers, the consumers, that this was coming, and to help them understand the new law and how it works. And there were efforts to make the reusable bags available free of charge to help people adjust and adapt.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilman Baker, woman.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry for my tardiness, and I'm not a member, but I do appreciate being here on this committee. Get my notes here. The Great Lakes is certainly made up of more than just Ohio. And we have Illinois and Indiana and Michigan and Minnesota, New York, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. All of those states all contribute towards their consumption. How many of those states are enacting through their counties a fee or tax or however it is that we describe this? Are we, in relationship to our county, which I believe is about, I don't know how many, 500,000 homes, what percentage of the other states that are all contributing to the Great Lakes are also helping with this cause?
Excuse me.
I guess my question is, we have Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all part of the Great Lakes region, and they're all contributing into these lakes. And are we a standalone? We're asking our constituents to pay 10 cents per bag. And are we a standalone? Is this just to change culture of our own county in relationship to everyone who is contributing towards this this use of bags? Can you give me any kind of scope as to what impact Cuyahoga County is going to have towards this effort when we have all these other states that are also part of the usage of our lakes?
Delegate Carr, I don't know if you have an answer for the localized question, but you can sure answer after I do. But Councilwoman Baker was not here last week, and you stayed for part of it, I think, but we have a map
Okay.
of all of the jurisdictions in the United States that have a fee or a ban, and one of them was Chicago, Illinois, and their significant reduction in plastic and their disposable bags. And so we can provide you with this map for this. And just to clarify, we're asking constituents to make a choice, not to pay a fee. So when there's a choice, we're not asking them to pay a fee. In fact, what the legislation asks is that they bring reusable bags, and that's the ask. But if Delegate Carr can answer about the other jurisdictions other than Illinois, and I'll give Ms. Baker the map, and this is global too.
Thank you. And before you answer, I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair. And I would ask that, I understand about Chicago, and Chicago did have a total ban. Then they, I think, eliminated that total ban, and they now are considering a 7-cent tax.
It passed, and there's been 40% reduction in the first month.
Yeah, but it's not a total ban anymore. Am I right, or
It's a fee,
it's a fee?
and they've reduced by 40% in 1 month.
So my question is, if you can provide it, how many of our states that are surrounding the Great Lakes, how many of them and how many constituents are there in those areas of the states that I outlined are actually involved in this program? And are we in the majority or are we in the minority? And I would have to say we're in the minority, but what percentage of the minority are we in our efforts in trying to, at the end result, clean the Great Lakes? That's my question.
Councilwoman Baker, that's a really good question, and we run into those type of issues pretty often when you're thinking about watersheds and water quality, and it's not that different than what we're experiencing here in the DC region. Not every jurisdiction has a bag fee, but two of the larger ones do, and it is working, and it's providing a benefit, not just to the place where the water ends up, which is, in our case, it's the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay, but it's also benefiting local communities that see less litter on the street and in their local creeks and streams before it even reaches the lake. It's not just about where it ends up, but it's also benefiting neighborhoods and local communities and streams.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. But I would still like to know what percentage is there that is actually contributing, as we are asking our constituents to contribute towards this effort when you're talking about the total Great Lakes, not just Lake Erie, because all the water, certainly isn't contained in one place. And, what kind of impact are we making? And Illinois, what kind of impact are they making? And whoever else I don't know about perhaps is involved in a bag fee, tax, whatever effort. Where are we in the large scope of looking at the entire Great Lakes? And that's, I think that's important to know that when we're asking, the people that we represent to pay for something that, we're kind of a lone wolf out there with maybe a couple others that have also contributed.
If I could just, Councilman President.
I just wanted to comment, Councilwoman, that it's true that this is a work in progress. I don't think, Chicago could be considered a lone wolf. It's one of the largest cities in America, easily the largest city on the Great Lakes. It is true that because of where Lake Erie is, we get we get plastic particles and we get pollution from the other Great Lakes. It's even heavier in Ontario, and I believe they have some laws in Toronto, which would be the other largest city on the Great Lakes. It also has it. If we do this, we would be the largest county on Lake Erie, the largest metropolitan community on Lake Erie. So I guess the thing is, where do you start? And I would say that it's fair to say that starting in the largest urban areas would be a fair place to start. And so I understand your question. I don't know where we would begin, whether we would have some kind of a pact that would involve everybody who's on the Great Lakes, which would also involve the entire province of Ontario. But I think it's reasonable to start with our own backyard. It's reasonable to start with larger cities that contribute more to this pollution than other areas. This is a complicated issue. I don't want to pretend it's not, but I'm just trying to respond to your question.
I appreciate that, Mr. President, and I guess the question is just one of fact, of how many others, and it's great to hear that Chicago, which is one of the largest, is contributing. That certainly adds to, the assistance.
Councilwoman Baker, I want you to know Michigan has a ban on plastic that touches 4 Great Lakes. And don't forget, the analysis is that we're not only looking at the plastic contamination in our freshest body of water on the whole planet that's found to be extremely concentrated in plastic particles that impact drinking water for our communities. This is a health issue. So for us to take a look at, we're not going to do anything because no one else is, and allow our residents to continue to drink toxic water, especially in the urban communities that don't have the ability to have fancy water filters, reverse osmosis filters. I think it's really important that we don't look at what are our neighbors doing when our house is on fire. And that's pretty much the analysis, but I'll be happy to give you all the facts, but I wanted to add that Michigan touches 4 Great Lakes and they have a ban. And there's over 70 million people in the United States that are under a ban or a fee. That's a lot of people in the United States, and it's increasing every year. But we'll be glad to give you that information if you're just looking at the Great Lakes, that I believe we have an ethical and moral obligation to protect for future generations. But we're also looking at landfill implications. You understand, I think from the testimony of Diane Bickett, I think you were here, and I appreciated that, that our landfills in Cuyahoga County are capped. There's no place else to put our waste. Plastic bags in particular are going to live on for almost 1,000 years, and we're exporting our bags and our trash to rural communities. Not only is there a cost financially to the community, but it's a cost to the state, and it's a cost to residents who live in rural environments who have to take on our trash. So we're using these items for 12 minutes, and we're going to pollute our planet and our communities for 500 to 1,000 years. I'm not going to, look around and say who else is going to do this. It's up to us. But I'll be happy to give you that information.
I appreciate
Delegate Carr, do you have any additional information if you're still hanging in?
Yes. When Washington D.C. Initiated their legislation, they were the first. Somebody has to be first, so they were the first, and followed by Montgomery County. And it does provide significant benefits to that jurisdiction, the people that are downstream. So, it's not like, they're just taking one for the team. And I think you hit on a really good point about the landfill and what happens to the bags today, that, a huge number of the bags that are given out today are used for just a few minutes, and they end up in your trash. Very small number of those end up being recycled. And we even had one landfill operator come in and testify in support of the legislation because he was explaining that in his landfill, people would throw away their plastic bags in the trash or whatever, and they would end up in his landfill. And then once they got into his landfill, some of them were blowing away and into the nearby forest. And they're very hard to deal with from a waste stream perspective. And, this is one way of getting at that problem that is affecting, local streams, creeks, forests, and landfills.
Councilman, are you finished, Councilwoman Baker?
Just one little follow-up. You talk about landfills and the bags, but what about all the bottles and all the other plastics that are thrown into those landfills? Can we isolate when we have so much other plastic that being used? I mean,
Is that like saying, why do we have laws against killing in one state when another state has so many other crimes? I mean.
no, that is nothing, that is
but the
nothing
bag-
to do that. It's saying that if we're talking about our landfills and the impact of our landfills, then we need to be talking about eliminating plastic bottles.
Do you want to sponsor that legislation?
Well, we should
I'd co-sponsor
be.
you.
And what else?
It'd be great. Well, no, not what else. This is the legislation in front of us, and it's 320 million plastic bags a year that Cuyahoga County disposes of, either by way of our landfill or by way of our rivers and lakes. So I will argue that for us to do nothing, because we can't do everything, is really a cop-out, and that's my opinion. And there's no reason not to act because we can't do everything. And that seems to be an argument from some sectors that if you can't solve every problem, then why bother? If you can't take away taxes on a federal level, then don't bother reducing my tax rate. Please don't do that. And that's the sentiment, is we should not act. I argue 320 million plastic bags a year that wind up in our lake and landfill is a significant way to protect our future in our lake. And why wouldn't we do this? There's no reason why consumers, as Delegate Carr has testified, can't use reusable bags. That's what we're asking. And I think when people learn about that they're drinking plastic in the water, everybody's going to come on board and say, I want to be a part of a solution for my future, and not sit here and look at every reason why we shouldn't act in a responsible, ethical, and moral way when we have an opportunity to do it. Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, Delegate Carr, over the course of this discussion here in Cleveland over the last few weeks, I've thought a lot about it, and it seems to me the end result or the end goal is ultimately the elimination of the use of these plastic bags and brown paper bags, and the complete use of a reusable bag. So in my mind, I'm thinking, how do we get to the point where everyone is ultimately just using a reusable bag? My question is, in the course of this legislation and your efforts, do you see this as an evolving legislation? Have you arrived at where you want to be? There's revenue being made. You mentioned the bag usage is down 60% in I believe you said DC and Montgomery area, but there's still 40% use. There's again revenue being produced from this by the retailers that are benefiting. Are you now static in where you want to be, or do you still seek to move this legislation or the community further towards a point where there's no use of plastic and just changing the culture to using a reusable bag?
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. That's a really good question. So I think this program, the legislation in D.C. and Montgomery County, was considered practical. It was something that could get passed, that was workable, that didn't create burdens on businesses, didn't create burdens on shoppers, and that's proven to be true. It actually does work. It is helping to reduce the problem, and it's accepted by the residents and the business owners. So there has not been a push to change it, to repeal it, or to change it, or say let's increase it from 5 cents to some other number. I think it's just considered to be something that's working, and being effective at addressing a problem that does exist.
And again, I say that to say, if a retailer receives 1 cent or 2 cents for a plastic bag, it actually makes it no different than any other product that they sell in the store, whether it's a jar of peanut butter or, are they doing as much as they can to, again, further educate? Have they ever considered the clerks offering each customer an opportunity to purchase a reusable bag? Things like that. You go into movies and stores and they say, do you want to supersize it, or do you want to add, they actually try to, not simply with signage, but actually ask the customer if they would consider doing something different. Do they make any efforts to, again, educate at their point of sale, not simply by signage, but verbal conversation with the customer?
Sure. So, what's happened here is it's been, I would describe it as a culture shift where people in massive numbers have just gotten into the habit of bringing the reusable bags. So you just get accustomed to putting some reusable bags in your car. Hopefully you remember to bring them inside the store, and then you bring them with you to the checkout. And there's a conversation that does take place. Usually the clerk will ask you, would you like a bag? Oh, that's going to be an extra 5 cents. So people learn pretty quickly, if they don't already know, how the law works and how to avoid the fee. And again, there was extensive outreach effort by both of those local governments to make sure that the retailers understood it and the consumers understood it as well.
Okay. Our legislation considers those who are using EBT cards, they are exempt. Does your legislation have any similar exemptions for low income?
No, in D.C. and in Montgomery County, there are no exemptions for low income.
Would it be possible, and this isn't necessarily a question for Delegate Carr, but we've done, obviously, EBT cards, but there have been instances where areas have been exempt or targeted. For example, City of Cleveland's Empowerment Zone, a geographically targeted area because of a need in that area. Census tracts that even more specifically identify low-income areas, more so than just a zip code, but a targeted area of low income. Would it be possible to consider an exemption that is a combination of cash assistant, the EBT card, and a census tract-based low-income area that would supplement the exemption?
Sure. I mean, we can discuss that, but what I think our legislation does is allow for the fee to provide for these reusable bags, and we can look for targeting additional reusables in areas you're suggesting. And I understand that that's a concern, but at some point, people will just stop. They're not going to have to spend the money. They're just not. They're going to have reusables. But absolutely, if there's, I think you're talking about census data we use for perhaps CDBG, Target, but everybody needs to participate in making our area clean. And if there's reusables that are available, then that's really the way, but we can talk about it.
Okay, and again, I see it as a pathway. If we could, again, focus on encouraging individuals to make the change, clearly seeing the value and importance of the bag. But again, and that would target even the low income, even those with EBT cards. We want them to change their pattern as well. So something that, again, targeted those who are EBT recipients, they may not have to pay the fee, but what does this legislation do to impact those who are EBT card recipients? What works?
To
what
change
I've found-
behavior, you mean? What,
Here, right here in our legislation, how do we enhance or better clarify what, and use those EBT recipients? They are not going to pay the fine or fee, or 10 cents. If you're for it, it's a fee. If you're against it, it's a tax, but it's 10 cents.
no, it's really
So
a
if
fee.
you-
but-
if they are not paying the 10 cents, but they are, for me, the perfect example of how we would, what we would do to encourage them to change their behavior, because that's, for me, that's truly has to be the cause. How do we change the behavior of our residents? And how do we encourage those who are exempt to change their pattern? Does it happen at the point of sale? Is there other more creative ways of brainstorming? But if it works for those who are EBT recipients, then it would work for everyone. And that is how I, as a councilman who serves the lowest levels to some more affluent areas, I have the widest economic range of anyone besides maybe Anthony Harrison on council. And I've had to find the common denominator, the lowest common denominator that will add across all areas. So I'm saying the same thing in Garfield that I'm saying in the heart of public housing. And those are the things that I search for. And as we look at this legislation, if there was something that targeted the EBT, that encouraged a change in their behavior, I think it would replicate and would translate across the entire county.
Okay. I
And
mean,
again, I say not to
we're
say that I have the
anticipating.
answer right now,
Yeah, I don't know,
but-
but here is an answer. I think, well, Delegate Carr said that across the board, that certain communities were not suffering as anticipated. And he can echo me in that the fear and the resistance while the legislation was pending, and I think it was just not long at all, but it was 6 to 8 weeks, that the anticipated fear of burdening certain communities did not come to pass, first of all. And second of all, I'm envisioning a 6-month period of education, huge education effort before it goes into effect. So we have, if it goes into effect and we pass it, it will be effective July 1st. So there's going to be a massive campaign to educate throughout all communities and to get these bags up front and start to really work in all communities and present education and all of that. So that gives us time. That's why there's a lag time to go through this huge education piece. Delegate Carr or Councilman? No, wait, Councilman.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You know, some of the ill effects or consequences that were talked about that might happen when the legislation was being discussed. Those things didn't come to pass. So it is not a burden on low-income people or any people, and it simply works. So that has been the experience in this area, which you can hopefully extrapolate from.
Yeah, it's a similar constituted county, Montgomery and Cuyahoga. Council President Brady.
Yes, and I think it's great that the representative from Maryland and the greater Washington, D.C. area is here because, we're familiar, most are familiar with the demographics of the District of Columbia and the pockets of low income that certainly rival ours, here in the city of Cleveland. I think, it's as best as I can tell, the sponsor, added these, added the, relief for low-income areas in order to recognize that there might be a burden. But I think if I understand your question correctly, the best way to go about it would not to do that at all, not to have any kind of relief for low-income areas, because then we would not be exempting them from this education process that you're talking about. So actually, I think that's probably where you're headed, is not giving relief to low-income areas, but having them, not be separate and treated differently than anybody else.
That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm starting to see it a little more clearly for myself. We want to change the mindset. I haven't talked to anyone who is opposed to keeping our environment clean. There's no one says, I want to dirty the waters. I want plastic in my fish in my body. No one is saying that. People's resistance tends to be around the money, the 10 cents. Those who are for it, it tends to be around the money. And you say you don't want to, if you don't ban, if we were to ban the plastic bags, well, then you lose your 10 cents. So there are those who would be concerned. I'm not calling names. I'm just saying, but 10 cents would go, 4 cents would go into one person's pocket and 6 cents into someone else's pocket. So the whole point of that is that money is behind everything. And we all have to be
Mr.
aware.
Jones, I just have to
That's
correct
all
you.
I'm simply-
No, if you ban plastic, there's going to be a fee on paper. And if people don't have to spend a dime on a bag.
But the thrust of my point is that I believe there may be a solution, and it would be right in the heart of EBT. If they are exempt, as the legislation says, but if we want to change people's attitudes, what are we doing to change the attitudes and the actions of those who are exempt? And that will extrapolate through everyone. Talk about in terms of what do you do with someone who is not, there's more poor than everyone else, okay? So if the poor are exempt, what do we do to change their behavior? Let's speak in terms
I
of
think
how-
because we're going to have the education 6 month, at least 6 month, and I think Delegate Carr said they still have educational programs that they're using, even though it's been in effect now for 7 years. So we're not going to exclude a community, and I don't think we can even isolate communities. And I think it's going to be a broad education of everybody. We're not picking people out, but you're saying if they're not a fee, if they don't have to pay a fee, are they going to change? And if they're not going to change, then we need to do something to make sure I think this is kind of, education, it will be part of the key, and we'll use the fee for that to get into the communities and talk about the water, talk about what people are drinking, talk about why this is important. And I think once we do that at every community level.
I do agree education is the key.
And we'll be using part of this money to do the educational campaign. And I don't think that stops. I think I heard Delegate Carr say they're continuing with education. Is that correct?
That's right. The outreach and the education, it continues to this day, and some of the money that's raised by the fee pays for that outreach and that education.
And we want the money to go down. It's not a money grab. I mean, in England, they just passed their legislation, I think last year, and there's been a drop of usage of single-use bags by 85%. So it's kind of like arts and culture and our syntax that we envision and hope that there's going to be a decline in revenue. So this isn't a money grab where we're going to be, using it for ongoing employment and programs, but it's going to be, the hope is to reduce the usage and then have less coming in. And that would be the goal. But it's, like arts and culture, we know smoking's down, and we knew that would happen.
One, I don't want anyone to think that targeted areas is something strange or unusual. As I mentioned, it's been done in many other instances. Census tracts have been used.
Yeah, CDBG.
Exactly. There's a legitimate reason why CDBG dollars have geographic targets. And again, I mentioned empowerment zone and others, so that's not a strange idea.
No.
Right? Even if it hadn't been heard by many. I'd like to leave the conversation open.
Yeah, that's fine. Good. I get it. I get your point. I appreciate it. And I agree with the education piece is going to be huge. I have two more. I want clarification for Councilwoman Baker in particular. I was reading this map and I need glasses. It's not Michigan, it was New York. I'm so sorry. And Toronto. Yeah, just for the record, it's not Michigan, it was New York that regulates and is attempting to do something statewide. And Toronto and British Columbia, most coastal cities, I'll give you this map.
What I'm asking for is the total number, and then how many are involved versus the total. That's all.
Okay.
I know what the states are. I'm not familiar with how many are actually, like Chicago is one, and New York now is one. in the grand total of those that surround the Great Lakes, where are we in the total number of those that are
Hopefully number 4.
Not in the little number, I want the big
I know,
numbers. Okay.
I'm just being,
May I ask one question that
Sure.
hasn't been asked? And the doctor, if he wouldn't mind, if we were to eliminate all bags, let's say that we're successful, all bags are gone, not only in Cuyahoga County, but every state around us is saying
plastic bags?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and now everyone is going with reusable bags. The reusable bags have a shelf life. And if we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people now having reusable bags that have a shelf life, and they need maybe 10, 15, 20 bags when they do their week or every other week shopping, how is that going to impact our Great Lakes when those bags are finally disposed of and do not break down like the plastic bags do now? Is there any technology? Is there anybody working on trying to create a reusable bag that after, I think the one that we were given a week or so ago has maybe 700 uses before it is considered time to get a new bag? What is the thought process of how we create a bag that can be reused 700 times, and then also then break down and don't end up in our lakes and maybe even cause more of a problem than what the bags that exist now do? Has that been talked about?
It's been discussed. And Delegate Carr, do you have a comment on that? Because I have a few. And by the way, these reusable bags don't have to be plastic. We're looking at targeting recyclable plastic bottles.
Yeah.
And it could be canvas. It could be all types of things.
Any of those have a shelf life?
Well, they have a shelf life anyways, because plastic bottles are already in this, as you said, a big problem. So what we're doing is turning that around and using them to eliminate a bigger problem that single-use bags create. But Delegate Carr, if you understood or heard the question?
Sure. Just, having lived with this legislation for, 8 years and 6 years in the area near me, like most families, we have, a collection of the reusable bags, like the one I'm holding up here. They're pretty sturdy. They actually, they hold a lot more than the plastic bags, and they're more comfortable to hold. But I think in the years that we've had this, I can't remember, going through a lot of these or having to eventually throw these out. They do last a pretty long time, so in practice it does seem to work pretty well. And next time you're campaigning, you can get some of these printed up with your logo and hand them out to voters too.
Well, it sort of answers the question. I don't know.
Okay, it's gone long. Thank you for participating. Any other questions? And
Just one kind of simple question. Guys, I've genuinely tried. I've used the bag you gave me. Never used one before, but I am using it now. But as I look at the bag, I just have one question. If you're shopping for a family, how do you put all of your grocery bags in the one bag, or you have multiple?
Delegate Carr, are people bringing multiple bags? I have 5 in my trunk right now.
Yeah, so we have a collection of them. Some are in my car, some are in my wife's car, and you bring them into the store. They're pretty tiny, so if you bring in 5 and you'll end up only using 3, that's not a big deal. And people have just gotten into the habit of keeping them around and bringing them into the store when it's time to shop, and avoiding the problem of having to use the disposable bags.
Just put them in your shopping cart and use the bags.
Exactly.
Okay.
I have one last question, and thank you, everybody, for being here. Have you been able to use the money for cleanup of the river and lake and employ people with jobs? Right now we have volunteers doing all the cleanup. I envision a pipeline for employment to green jobs and being able to put people to work with the cleanup of our beaches and lake and communities. Are you using this to employ people in Montgomery or DC?
Yeah, so yeah, the money does go to cleanup activities, which does employ people, whether it's somebody who's installing trash traps or maintaining them, or, somebody who's doing stormwater type projects, or other types of water quality projects. I would say definitely yes. There are jobs that do benefit from that revenue, which I would consider to be green jobs.
Okay. All right, I think we're done. Delegate Carr, and really appreciate your insight and your willingness to talk to us this afternoon, and I appreciate it, and have a good day. We're going to close out our meeting.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Very informative. I have no miscellaneous business. Is there other public comment?
No, Madam Chair.
I have a miscellaneous business. Is it just me, or did the delegate from Maryland sound exactly like Julian Rogers from Cleveland Heights?
Yes, he does.
I couldn't get over it.
You're right.
We did attend the same high school.
Oh, he's still there.
Ed,
How are
they
you?
know each other.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Friends on Facebook, so there you go.
Okay, me too. Okay, so we're going to come back next week, I think Wednesday at 3. We have a lot of legislation coming through committee, maybe even we might have to add another day. But I'd like to continue discussion if we can next Wednesday at 3. And we're going to adjourn, and I appreciate everybody's questions.